Welcome to the Daily Dispatch. First up, in a shift from the norm, we're spotlighting the US taking note of Israel's illegal settlement in the West Bank. Next, we're covering reports of Iran disbanding its morality police in response to the ongoing protest after the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, and if it holds any truth. And to round things up, after protests sprung up across China over strict COVID restrictions, we're seeing the Chinese state taking a step back and easing lockdowns. Stay with us as we break down how this will affect the global supply chain. We're here to give you news and to help you infer the world around you. I'm Tayyaba Nisar Khan, and here is your Daily Dispatch. For our first dispatch, we're covering US Secretary of State Antony Blinken warning the incoming Israeli government against increasing settlements in the occupied West Bank and pledging to oppose further settlements. Benjamin Netanyahu is set to become the new Prime Minister of Israel. His coalition partners include the pro-settler parties, which call for the forceful removal of Palestinians from the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Now, the Israeli settlements are considered illegal under international law and have been an obstacle to the two-state solution. Palestinians fear that Israel under Prime Minister Netanyahu will expand the illegal settlements, which saw a record rise during his previous administrations. It's important to note the US Secretary of State's statements comes at a time when Israel is embarking on a new policy approach of establishing diplomatic and economic ties with Arab and African states under the Abraham Accords. It is feared that illegal settlements will further hurt and undermine a political solution to the Israel-Palestine conflict, which many believe is necessary for lasting and durable peace in the region. Next up, we're covering reports of Iran disbanding its morality police, a force that has existed since the Islamic Revolution in 1979. The Attorney General in Iran has stated that the morality police has been suspended. However, in the absence of any confirmation from the Ministry of Interior, which oversees the morality police, the effectiveness of this suspension is still a question. While still unconfirmed, this could be a major development, with the morality police often viewed as a major instrument of state control in Iran. If you haven't been keeping up with the news, the morality police was allegedly responsible for the death of the 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, who fell into a coma briefly after being arrested on September 13th for refusing to cover her hair with a hijab or headscarf. Her death triggered countrywide protests, demanding the abolition of the morality police, among other things, which have been met with a harsh crackdown from the state. According to Amnesty International, more than 300 people have been killed so far, while over 14,000 have been arrested under different charges. The demonstrations garnered international solidarity, while Iran accuses the West of fomenting instability, interfering in its domestic affairs, and instrumentalizing human rights for political gains. It is important to remember that Iran already faces crippling economic sanctions, and nuclear talks with the West have seen little progress, and the current wave of protests further amplified the rhetoric on both sides, dampening any prospect of engagement with the West. And for our final headline, let's move to Beijing, where China is easing the COVID-19 restrictions, reducing the fears of further disruption in the global supply chains. China is easing COVID-19 restrictions across the country, including Beijing. This means residents will no longer be required to carry a negative test report for using public transport. The move comes at a time when China has seen COVID-19 infections increase to an all-time high. In the past few weeks, COVID-19 cases had witnessed a sharp spike, and the subsequent government restrictions triggered the demonstrations in different cities in China. The government defended its issuance of stringent measures, citing it's a priority to contain the virus and protect vulnerable and unvaccinated people. COVID-19 restrictions in the second biggest economy of the world had already caused major disruptions in production and global supply chains. These disruptions have been further exacerbated by the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And let's not forget, with China accounting for nearly 30% of global manufacturing, when the conveyor belt in China stops moving, the global production and trade inevitably slows down too. While there has been some easing of the restrictions, experts remain skeptical. With the need for normalcy essential for both the Chinese and global economies, unless we see more progress, further disruptions in the global supply chains will increase commodity prices and the inflationary pressure, affecting already struggling developing states even more. Also on the dispatch, we bring you top stories from around the world. Firstly, an annual report on weapons trade shows arms sales and military services are up by 1.9%. A report by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute showed analyzed data of the 100 biggest defense corporations. This is the 7th consecutive year for rising arms sales, despite supply chain issues which have been challenged due to the Ukraine war, the global pandemic, and other notable disruptions. Second, West African leaders have decided to establish a regional peacekeeping force to combat terrorism. West and Central Africa have experienced multiple coups over the last 2 years and want to make progress on thwarting such incidents in the future. The Economic Commission for West African States plans to restore the security and constitutional supremacy in the member states as an indigenous approach to strengthening the governance. And lastly, Indonesia's Mount Semeru volcano erupted on Sunday, blanketing the East Java province with volcanic ash and dense smoke. Nearly 2,000 residents in the province were evacuated, and an 8-kilometer no-go zone was implemented as a disaster response mechanism. No injuries or deaths have been reported so far, and mitigation efforts for the health interventions are being implemented as we speak. And that's all, folks. We'll be back tomorrow with more bite-sized news that keeps you up to date with what's happening in the region and the globe. I'm Tayyaba Nisar Khan, and this was your Daily Dispatch.